It's finally here. The NFL draft starts tonight. We give you our boldest predictions for things that could happen during the draft on today's episode of Locked On Fantasy Football.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
For making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. I'm one of your co-hosts, Michelle Magdziuk, and when I'm not doing this, I'm a researcher in NFL and a fantasy analyst with NFL Network.
I'm your other co-host, Vinnie Iyer, and when I'm not doing this, I'm an NFL fantasy and betting analyst for sportingnews.com. You can check out my final 3-round mock draft that's up now. And tonight, come over there. I'll have a live pick-by-pick analysis of the first round. We'll do it all through Thursday night and Friday night for you for the first 3 rounds. So a lot of good stuff here on the network as well for you to check out, as well as sportingnews.com and NFL.com.
Yeah. Today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. I admit it, I have a competitive side, and I am a big fan of Monopoly Go, the mobile hit twist on classic Monopoly. So join your friends and download Monopoly Go, now free on the App Store or Google Play. All right, with the draft tonight, you and I were each going to give our 3 boldest predictions. So these are things that are not likely to happen, right? But we think there's an inkling. We have a little feeling in ourselves that we think it could happen. So, Vinny, give me your first boldest prediction that could happen, whether it be tonight or throughout this draft.
Yeah, I'm not sure how this information is being fed. It's been kind of widespread now, but there is a rumbling throughout the league, according to some draft insiders, that Malik Nabers is going to be drafted ahead of Marvin Harrison at wide receiver.
Yeah.
So I'll have to see it to believe it, first of all. But this has been developing for a while, and I think the silly thing, it's kind of related to Marvin Harrison Jr. not having the, quote, momentum. He didn't work out at the combine. He didn't work out at his pro day. Malik Nabers started to do all these things, made himself visible, and impressed throughout the pre-draft season. But I wouldn't say Marvin Harrison was out of sight, out of mind. He still was a dominant player for many seasons at Ohio State in terms of what he produced. And we know if you go back to CJ Stroud's pro day in 2023, he was the most impressive player on the field. So I think you look at Harrison, I think you're just overthinking too much a little bit with Harrison versus Nabers. Now, the reason I would go Harrison over Nabers and why he's been ahead is he's just a little bit bigger. I think he's a little bit more complete. I think he's a guy maybe has less route versatility in terms of maybe working the slot as well as Malik Nabers, but does that really matter? I mean, this guy can be a dominant X or Z on the outside making big plays. So I personally don't think it should happen. Let's just get that out there. I think I've loved Marvin Harrison. Again, I said many seasons. It seems like many seasons, but I think looking at his play and think about some of the receivers this program has produced: Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson, Jackson Smith-Njigba. These are all first rounders. And keep in mind, JSN was the first wide receiver drafted last year. And I don't think he was really more than the 4th best receiver in that group, right? When you look at Olave, Wilson, and JSN, you'd say Marvin Harrison is better than all 3 of them. And we know what Olave and Wilson have done in the NFL. So I don't know, maybe we're looking at Malik Nabers and then comparing him to Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase, and then those 2 guys are coming in, but these are all individual prospects. You can't attach a guy to all the people that came before him at the school. I think you can use that as a reference, knowing a type of system or a type of culture that program produces really good players at a position. But I think it's ludicrous, Michelle, but if it happens, don't be shocked because there's been some rumors about it. And I think the way that would really happen, and I'll just lay out that scenario, if the Cardinals trade out of number 4 and the Chargers are locked in to Malik Nabers a little bit more and think he's the best fit for what they want to do, then they can go that direction. If the Vikings move up to 4 or 5, then I could see this happening. Or maybe you have a scenario where the Cardinals and the Chargers trade out and people are coming to get quarterbacks, and then you have a team like the Giants saying, okay, we may not like this receiver over the other based on what we have. So there's so many different things that could happen here. But again, if this happens, I don't know if I would be really comfortable if I was that head coach or general manager to take Nabers over Harrison. I get it. They're both elite prospects, but Harrison is so can't miss.
Yeah, the whole if Neighbors goes over Harrison, that is a whole overthinking it to its finest. Like Marvin Harrison
Yeah.
is a slam dunk pick. It's not the same. Malik Neighbors won't be great. He probably will be. It will become really interesting if the Cardinals do trade out for a team to move up for a quarterback. Now there's all these reports that Jim Harbaugh really wants to go tackle with Joe Alt. Who knows if it's lying season
Yeah.
or what. But if that happens, then these guys start to fall down. It's going to be crazy to see what happens here. Now, mine is about what my first prediction is about wide receivers. But it's that only 3 wide receivers get drafted on night 1. I think I love this wide receiver class. It has nothing to do with me thinking this wide receiver class is bad or whatever. It's really because it's so good that I think the second tier of guys after the top 3, there's so many that and even like different skill sets. If you miss out on one guy, there's another guy sitting right there that has a similar skill set, right? That you can get in the second round. So I think we see a ton of wide receivers go day 2, but only 3 go day 1. Now we have gone through, it's been 4 straight drafts with at least 4 wide receivers taken in the first round. That's the longest streak of such drafts in the common draft era. So maybe it continues, but I'm saying it's going to be broken. Now, obviously, Harrison, Neighbors, Odunze all get drafted night 1. Very likely I'll go top 10. But I don't know, like I said, if another wide receiver will be taken. I think the wild card here is Brian Thomas Jr. He's getting a lot of hype right now that he can go in the teens. I know Dane Brugler from the Athletics said like his floor would be to go at 20 to the Steelers. I'm a Steelers fan. I love Brian Thomas Jr. And I wouldn't like that pick. I just would much rather save that wide receiver. I think we can get someone similar to Brian Thomas Jr. in the second round. I think it's a reach there for any team to go. And I also think there's going to be at least one veteran wide receiver traded tonight, which would kind of mess up the wide receivers as well. But like there's just too many good wide receivers that you can get in the second round, third round. I don't know why a team would, waste one of those picks and reach for these wide receivers here in the late first round.
Yeah, and there's a few reasons for what you say to actually come true, and probably I'm hoping that yours comes to fruition more than mine, because what is at play is teams trading up for quarterbacks. That's always going to throw things off, because we know that Bo Nix, Michael Penix, not necessarily in the top 25 when you look at the overall prospects, but they're quarterbacks. So teams could throw things off by trading up and getting in position for the quarterbacks. And then you look at Brian Thomas Jr. Is he that much better than Troy Franklin? Do people like A.D. Mitchell enough to take him in the first round over his teammate Xavier Worthy? You got Keon Coleman sitting there. You've got Lad McConkey. There's so many guys in different skill sets as well, but you're going to find a flavor of wide receiver, not just there, but if you go down, we've talked about Malachi Corley and some other values that are available a little later in this draft. And the strength of this wide receiver class is so good, it actually might hurt some of these draft positions, because everyone's going to say, hey, I want to jump on this position that's a little having more scarcity and go for a top player, maybe a pass rusher. That's always something that you're looking for, or a defensive tackle. It might be a little bit thin here at that position. I see the Bears potentially going in that direction. Versus, say, if they had Rome Odunze on the table, they might go Byron Murphy too, because they're terrible at defensive tackles. So that could also throw things off. If one wide receiver like Odunze slides, then he's going down a little later. Then that even lessens the possibility of another wide receiver going. So I'm right there with you. I think this really could happen. And this is bold, but I think it's a little bit more realistic than mine. I'm hoping. I do not want Neighbors to go ahead of Harrison. But yeah, this is going to be interesting to watch. The other thing that teams have in mind, wide receivers have a pretty high first round bust rate in terms of getting to that next contract. So second round wide receivers, you've found some good values there. So I think something to look at more than the first round. So interesting
there's been some
developments.
really great wide receivers to fall into the second round just
Yeah.
since 2018. I mean, George
DK
Pickens, Tee
Metcalf.
Higgins, Michael Pittman, Debo Samuel, AJ Brown, DK Metcalf, Cortland Sutton, like so many good guys
Yeah.
fall to the second round.
It's a sweet spot, I think, for the wide
Yeah.
receivers. Yeah, because you end up with guys that don't get the hype, but maybe just solid all around players. And I think that happens a lot. So I think teams are wary of that for sure. I think they study draft history of positions and what they can get. But I think you're absolutely right. I think there's a big gap between what you can get in Harrison, Dunze, Nabers, that tier versus everyone else.
Yep. And we have 2 more wide receiver predictions for you coming up here, but with veterans that we think will be traded early in this draft. I'm really hoping for one of them to happen a ton. We'll get to that right after we hear from a couple of our sponsors. I've been told I'm a competitive person by many, many, many people. And yes, I know it's true. I agree. I do have a competitive side. We all do. And my competitive side is a big fan of Monopoly Go. I'm sure you heard of it. I bet it's been downloaded over 150 million times. It's a great twist on Monopoly where you play on not one, but hundreds of Monopoly boards in crazy locations, building up amazing cities that bring you big money. But the best part is messing with my friends. I can charge some rent on my iconic properties, just like classic Monopoly. But now I can also heist their vaults of riches for myself. And the leaderboard show me who the biggest Monopoly tycoon is. But it's not just my competitive side that loves it. You can team up with friends and people all around the world in time tournaments to earn huge rewards. So get into the game and join your friends. Download Monopoly Go now free on the App Store or Google Play. This episode's also brought to you by FanDuel. It's playoff time in the NBA and NHL. Baseball is in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. Bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all on an app that is safe, secure, and easy to use. My favorite bet of the week is actually today, so you got to get it in. It's an early evening game. 76ers point spread at -4.5 over the Knicks on Thursday. They're home. They lost the first 2 games on the road. They're going to take this one by a big margin. What are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, Vinny, I'm going to take this first. I think mine is more likely to happen, I'll say. All right. And this is what we need in the Magdziuk household and at my household right now. This is what we're rooting for tonight. It's Brandon Aiyuk will get traded to the Steelers for the 20th overall pick. It may be extra, right? I'm just throwing the first rounder out there. They might have to give more. But listen, I think the Amon-Ra St. Brown contract yesterday, over $30 million a year. That's what Brandon Aiyuk is going to now want. You saw him on Instagram as soon as this contract news happened. He's dancing. He's all excited. I really don't think it makes sense for the 49ers to pay him that. I'm not saying he's not worth it, but with the way they utilized him, he had 104 targets last year. You cannot give a guy $30 million a year to get 100 somewhat targets, right? 100 and 110 targets. He's never had more than 114 in a season in his career. It was great. He was super efficient last year, but you can't just depend on that hyper efficiency. So unless they plan to make him the focal point, it makes no sense for the 49ers to give him that amount of money. Now, the Steelers, on the other hand, they only have George Pickens. They shipped off their starting wide receiver that regularly got 150 targets every season and Deontay Johnson. They have room for a guy that can be a volume guy. The Steelers also just made cap room with restructuring Alex Highsmith's contract to save $7 million on the cap this year. And really, they did that for no reason because they already had plenty of space to sign the rookies that they draft. So now they're close to $18 million under the cap. That seems like they're getting ready for something and they're desperate for wide receiver help. It really does seem like they're moving towards making a big trade here. And this, for whatever reason, right? I'm a Steelers fan and I don't believe this, but the Steelers seem to really think they have a Super Bowl window here with Russell Wilson. I think they're going to do everything possible to trade for a guy like Brandon Aiyuk. It all comes down to if the 49ers will accept the trade.
Yeah, I mean, we also saw this is an interesting move because there was a trade involving Brandon Aiyuk there to acquire him in the draft. We had a move with DeForest Buckner a few years ago that made that a little bit possible there, Javon Kinlaw and all that happened with the 49ers. So we'll be coming full circle to deal Aiyuk here. And the reasons are myriad, but they're also investing quite a bit in George Kittle and Deebo Samuel. They got to pay Brock Purdy as well in 2025 when he's eligible for that contract extension. It's just hard to tie up that much money on multiple wide receivers. And Aiyuk is good, but he's not Amon-Ra St. Brown. They had to motivate this guy the first few years under Kyle Shanahan to produce. I mean, Amon-Ra stepped on the field and was productive, and I think he was a key figure in turning around the whole Lions organization and their offense and all that. So I don't know how this is comparable at all. Like, I think Aiyuk has had one great year, and he's a good deep threat type guy, and he's produced. But man, Amon-Ra has been one of the elite receivers in terms of his production ever since he stepped on the field as the main guy in the slot for the Lions. So that aside, I think the same thing that is happening in San Francisco might be a consideration in Cincinnati. Now, they've already paid their quarterback, Joe Burrow, but they haven't paid their wide receiver yet. Jamar Chase's fifth-year option just got picked up. Now, there was an interesting report yesterday that Tee Higgins has gone maybe hot and cold about his trade request out of there. We also heard that Trey Hendrickson, their talented defensive end, was also looking to get out of there. Now, typically, and this is why Michelle said her move is more likely than what I'm thinking about, the 49ers are willing to make those deals. The Bengals are not. I mean, their big deal, they're going to call it a blockbuster, was moving Joe Mixon. But they moved Joe Mixon because they got something for him versus just releasing him. So Tee Higgins, again, that's setting all the table up for Tee Higgins. Now, where would he land? I think the Titans, we talked about the landing spots for these wide receivers. If something happens where Nabers or Udinze slips by or both, go to 7 in the Titans, I think they'd be interested in wide receiver, especially Nabers. So that tells me they want a wide receiver, some more help there for Will Levis. And they have the number 38 pick that they could use in a package and send it to Cincinnati for Tee Higgins, and makes a lot of sense because you have Brian Callahan. He was the offensive coordinator in Cincinnati. He's now in Nashville. So this is my bold prediction that Tee Higgins is still going to be traded. Now, everyone says, okay, the Bengals, we know, have a Super Bowl window. And we talked about the Steelers, that's debatable. Bengals do have a Super Bowl window as long as Joe Burrow is healthy. That's the reason they say they're not going to trade him, but that says do trade him because you already have Jamar Chase. You can go find receivers in this class. We just talked about how deep it is. So I say do it, trade Tee Higgins, get bold. I think it's the move they should make. Unfortunately, I don't know if they will. This would be a win-win, get that extra draft pick. Maybe change up your offense, maybe find a way to package up and go get Brock Bowers if you make this deal early enough. So there's different ways they can approach it, but I say you can't pay Chase and Higgins long term. So might as well get the highest possible return for Higgins. Now, again, for the second straight bold prediction, yours is a little bit less bold because it actually could happen. Mine are a little bit out there, but again, if these two guys are traded, I think it makes a lot of sense and it should happen.
Yeah, so with Tee Higgins, I think it could happen for sure.
Yeah.
I'm kind of confused why the Bengals aren't just paying him because this would be paying low. So right now, if the 49ers need to pay for Aiyuk, they're paying high, right? He's coming off this insane season of efficiency. With Tee Higgins, it's the opposite. He's been injured. He hasn't produced for now like a season and a half. So this is the time where you could probably get him under contract for $25 million most, right? He's going to get Devonta Smith money at most. That's going to seem very, very low, probably even as soon as next year once Jefferson and Chase and all these guys get paid. Like, I don't think it's going to be that crazy with the cap continuing to increase to have your wide receiver 2 make $25 million a year. I think if I was the Bengals, this is the year I'd be wanting to pay him. If I'm Tee Higgins, I want to play this year with a healthy Joe Burrow, with myself hopefully healthy, where I can put up massive numbers and then get paid way, way more than what I would get paid this year. So I think it's stupid of Higgins to ask for a trade. I think it's stupid of Higgins to I get wanting the security, wanting to get paid, but if he just believed in himself, I would be trying to go till next year. And if I'm the Bengals, I'd be paying him immediately on the low. It's like playing fantasy. You trade for guys on the low. You don't trade for them at their highest peak, right? Then you're overpaying them. But yeah, I could see it happening. I just think it would be stupid on both ends. Or not for the end of the team that's trading for him because they're getting a steal.
Yeah, I just don't think you should pay two guys of that value at wide receiver. And that's my biggest issue is that I think wide receiver is one position where you can find some help. And I think you can look no further than the Chiefs. Now it's a little bit different because they end up paying Travis Kelce more, but what have they done? They've been pretty interchangeable at the other receivers. They moved
most teams don't have Patrick Mahomes. I mean,
right.
no team has
I know,
Patrick
but
Mahomes.
Joe Burrow is not a slouch. And And you look at what the Steelers have. Okay, maybe Russell Wilson still has to reprove himself there in Pittsburgh, but like Joe Burrow can make it work. I mean, they're already moving on from Tyler Boyd, who was a guy that Joe Burrow really trusted. So he was handing the ball to Joe Mixon. They're going to move on. I think just to sustain yourself, once you've paid your quarterback in this league, and the 49ers have to think about that because they're paying Brock Purdy nothing. They don't have to worry about his extension. They can't worry about his extension legally until 2025. So you got to think ahead. If you want to maintain in this league, you got to move ahead. And I think Tee Higgins is replaceable. Jamar Chase, very hard to replace. Like if I had to bump a few more million in the territory of Jamar Chase, I would do that. I just think this is the right time because it's wider. You could get a guy at 38 that's probably good here, as good as Tee Higgins. Keep in mind, he was a second round pick. And then they had Chase and came along. So if you're confident in your organization, turn around and go get that replacement, save money. Look what happened again with the Vikings. They moved on from Stephon Diggs, went around and got Justin Jefferson. I mean, that's how you kind of play this game a little bit and go forward. And I think it's just very hard in this league to pay 2 wide receivers when you also have to pay your quarterback. That's a lot invested in 3 positions, whereas is spreading it around and knowing, again, wide receivers a little bit deeper. I mean, you can't find maybe edge rushers and those type of guys on the market or offensive tackles as easily. So a little bit of inside there, but wide receivers we've been seeing traded. A.J. Brown, Marquise Brown, all these guys were traded during the draft. So it definitely is a position that gets often traded there, and we'll see how it plays out. But I'm excited. I want to see some trades involving players as well as picks tonight to make it really go nuts. So we will close the show with a quarterback prediction. How could we not? We got to have something for the first round there. So we'll have that for you. And it involves one of Michelle's favorite quarterbacks. Stay tuned for that. This episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role, just like teams looking for the ideal draft picks to load their roster and starting lineups. It's the same thing. You need to do your homework and research, but you do have help because that's why you got to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just a job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job but might be open for the perfect role. In a given month, more than 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place for your hires. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. That's right, in just one day. Hire professionals like a professional only on LinkedIn. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and might not have the time or resources to hire. So get your scouting department. That's LinkedIn for you, constantly finding ways to make the process easier. They've even launched a feature that makes you write up job descriptions, making the process even easier and quicker. 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. Why isn't yours one of them? Check it out now. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions do apply. All right, Michelle, I'm going to let you take the first prediction here because it's about the guy that you loved and talked about when we broke down the quarterbacks yesterday. So tell us exactly how high you are on Michael Penix Jr.
Yeah, so this probably isn't the craziest prediction because there are a lot of mocks that have him going to the Raiders at number 13, right? But there
Fine.
still are a ton of people who believe Michael Penix Jr. will fall to the second round. Like a good vast majority think that he's a second round prospect and he won't go till then. And I cannot see him falling out of the top first half of the draft. I'll even say top 13. I won't be surprised if the Raiders move up for him to go even higher than that. But we talked about Michael Penix Jr. yesterday, right? I'm really high on him. I think he just has a lot of talent and he has a great arm. And I think he can play like a CJ Stroud and find a lot of great success early in this league. I'm willing to throw out the terrible Indiana years at Indiana, the first 4 years at school, I know, but 2 ACL tears, shoulder injury, pandemic, like all of that stuff. But as soon as he gets to Washington, back to back dominant years, put up over 4,500 yards, over 30 passing touchdowns, both of those seasons. Over the last 15 years, there have been 2 Power 5 quarterbacks that have back-to-back seasons with 4,500 plus passing yards and 30 plus passing touchdowns. It's Michael Penix Jr. and Patrick Mahomes. Like, he is talented. That's all I got to say. But there's 6 teams in the top 13 that are desperate for a quarterback. It's the Bears, Commanders, Patriots, Vikings, Broncos, Raiders. Like, and he's clearly one of the top 6 best quarterbacks. So I think if all of them take a quarterback, which might not happen, but I do believe Bo Nix should go well after Michael Penix Jr. So I just need 5 of those teams to take one. But even let's say only 4 of those teams take one, that leaves out Michael Penix Jr. There's still other surprise teams that need a quarterback or that are thinking about a quarterback, right? We've heard the Giants connected to Michael Penix Jr. Could they move down a little bit and take him, or stay there and take him? That would be a shocker. For some reason, the Titans aren't considered a team that are looking at a quarterback. I don't know why. Like, you're just that comfortable with Will Levis. I'm shocked that they haven't done any research on quarterbacks, but maybe they could be a surprise. The Seahawks could move up to take Penix or take him at 16. I think that's his floor. The Saints, like, you're really just happy with Derek Carr for your future. Like, another team that could be a surprise team there that could move up to take him, or again, maybe they take him at 14. But I can't see Penix falling past the top 16 picks.
Yeah, and it comes down to supply and demand. When you start the draft, you have 3 teams immediately looking for quarterbacks. They've seemingly found theirs there with the Bears, Commanders, and Patriots. Then you get to that stretch of 3 teams again. It's kind of interesting because it's 1, 2, 3, and it's 11, 12, 13. So that's how it breaks down. The Vikings, Broncos, and Raiders there. The Vikings could move up. So that's 6 teams, 6 quarterbacks when you do the math and add the top 3 and then throw in Bo Nix, Michael Penix, and J.J. McCarthy. So there's a lot to consider and unpack there. And does a team see the law of supply and demand and say, I got to move up? And there's teams that are kind of circling the wagons that you're not sure are going to take a quarterback. And that's what's going to throw off teams here quite a bit. The Giants are that team. That's why you've heard so much about the Vikings moving up to number 3, or 3 is not as likely, but now 4 and 5 are, right? So we look at the Vikings having that ammunition here with number 11 and number 23 overall. So if that happens and teams are more aggressive, then the quarterbacks are going faster and you got to get here before you lose one. So all kinds of things to consider. And then I've also thrown out the possibility the Vikings trade with the Giants and the Giants move down and they grab Michael Penix, and then the Raiders have to move up to make sure they get Bo Nix. So there's all kinds of things that you need to consider with these quarterbacks going. So that's a bold prediction. We talked about the Giants and Seahawks. I feel like one of these teams is just going to pull an absolute shocker for a first-round QB. And if Michael Penix does not go in the top 16, it's going to be right after or soon after, because I think the Seahawks are a legitimate target. They just went to the Washington offense. Literally, they lifted the offensive coordinator from the Huskies and put him in Seattle for the pro team. So again, when you think about that, are they really sold on Geno Smith? The contract is just about as good as Daniel Jones, and Geno Smith's older, and it's a totally different offense. It was great that Geno Smith did okay with Shane Waldron, but now he's in Chicago, and that system is gone. And keep in mind, Geno had a lot of experience in that system, given he was the backup to Wilson for a couple of years with that. So they might just turn the page here. And look, they might say, hey, Geno's okay, but we don't have a ceiling with Geno. We don't have the same deep ball. We want somebody that's going to get the ball to DK Metcalf, streaking down the field with such beautiful ease with his left arm. So that's what they could be thinking about. So new coaches change everything. You mentioned the Saints. They're also looking at a 49er style of offense. So again, they're not going to be attached to Derek Carr necessarily. So there's a lot of teams that could do this. So maybe both of our predictions will come together here and we'll see the Giants, Seahawks, or enter team surprise here, go after that quarterback, have to move up and go get Michael Penix in the top 16, because I've been torn in my mock. I put them finally. I just said, here, they're 13 with the Raiders. They'll figure it out. They might take them at 13. They might take them earlier. They might take them later. I had him at 44 to the Raiders. I think that's a stretch now. I don't think that's going to happen. Law of supply and demand says, good luck finding a franchise quarterback, especially because there's no one else. You really look around. Do you want Jordan Travis coming off injury? Joe Milton, who's just a walking big arm. There's nothing else there. There's not a lot here at quarterback in this class if you want to get into it.
Yeah. Spencer Rattler is probably the one interesting guy after these top group here. But Yeah, I could totally see the Seahawks take a quarterback. There's really no reason not to, because every year you go into the season with Geno Smith, you're saying our
Yeah.
end goal is not the Super Bowl. I mean, that's
We're
what
just
you're
trying to get
telling.
to the
That's what you're
playoffs, and
telling
that's
people.
it.
Your end goal is the playoffs, maybe a wild card win, and that's it. Your end goal is
Yeah.
not the Super Bowl, and that's not a fun place to be in for a franchise. So, yeah, they need to make a move here to figure out their future. So excited for the draft tonight. We'll get so many answers on night one. That is it for today's show. Thank you to all for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. Every dayers, Vinnie and I will be back tomorrow analyzing the first round, all the offensive players and skill players that found their new homes. It's going to be a blast. Don't miss it. Bye, y'all.